I had heard of heartache and always thought of it as more of an emotional thing. But when Lance died, I experienced true heartache, and it was the worst physical pain I have ever experienced in my life. It felt like someone had reached inside my chest, grabbed a hold of my heart with both their hands, and were squeezing as hard as they could. Felt like my heart was going to explode. Every night when I went to bed, I was sure that I was going to die from the pain. I waited for my death every night. I even welcomed it, but it never came. The physical pain stopped after several weeks, and I found myself continuing to wake up day after day. At first, I thought maybe I only had a couple of years left because by the time Lance passed away, I was so exhausted. I really felt like I was over 100 years old. I didn't really have an idea of how old I truly was. But eventually I realized my life might only be half over. And if I could potentially live for several more decades, I wanted to live, not just exist. That's why I've been intentional about everything that I do as I move forward, who I spend my time with, and what I do with my time. It's been 4 years since Lance died. Grief is complicated. There have been times when I've been stuck in it, and there are times when I feel like I'm on top of the world. Anniversaries hit me hard. And every time I hit a milestone, the first person I want to tell is Lance. But he isn't here. He was the one that I shared everything with. So instead, I keep most things to myself because after a while, nobody wants to hear about your loss anymore. And most people who knew him stopped saying his name a long time ago. And in a lot of ways, that makes it feel like he never existed.
As you moved into that space where you knew you were getting close to the end of his life, I guess you can never really be prepared, but were you aware of the fact that it was going to be so physically painful for you after he died? Or, I mean, I know you knew a lot of people who had gone through loss, and I didn't know if anyone had ever shared that with you.
No, there was not a single person who shared that with me. And it wasn't until after I lost Lance, and I've had several friends lose their spouses, and I've talked to them about it. And they've all said, yes, they felt that same physical pain. And for some reason, everyone's afraid of talking about it.
I knew a couple at one point, and they had lost their son. He was young, maybe 10 or 12 years old, and they lost him in a car accident. And I can remember her telling me about the physical pain of broken heart. I have a cousin too who also lost a child. Her daughter was 13 and was killed in a bicycle accident. And same thing, she said physical, like excruciating physical pain. Do you know where that comes from? Why that manifests that way?
I don't. That's not something that I've ever looked up. It was something that, like I said, when it was happening, I welcomed my death. I didn't care if I died. And when I got past it and it didn't hurt anymore, because it really was the worst physical pain I've ever felt. And when I got past it, I I guess I just never really thought about looking it up. I've been so busy doing other things. But now that you say that, I'm going to look it up when we're done here.
It just seems to be universal and nothing that I had ever realized prior to speaking to that woman that I had met, and then, like I said, my cousin. And then when you brought it up after Lance died, I remember you talking to me about it, and I thought it's just wild that our body reacts when we're going through such emotional trauma in such a physiological way. It's just wild to me.
Yeah, I was so surprised by it. But and I know that this this whole conversation started off as kind of a downer with all of that, but really I wanted to share that to just kind of show some of the things that I've been through and where I'm at now. We've talked a lot about grief in the past few episodes, and that was where I started right after Lance passed away. And in the beginning, um, I didn't think that I was ever going to get beyond that point. And so to look back 4 years ago and see where I am now, it's just, I've come so far. Things have changed a lot and I've healed a lot.
I would say it's bordering on miraculous because you, for all the parts of you that are still here right now, that were there the first day I met you, you've done so much growing and changing and evolving. And every time I talk to you, there's something new that has um, risen to the surface and you just glow. So I see this change and this renewal and growth in you, and it's incredible.
Well, I think that there's something about experiencing death of the person who was the most important person in your life. And I guess it could go either way. I could either not want to live, which is how I felt in the beginning. But then when I realized I was continuing to live, even though I didn't want to, I figured I better do something about it. And I'm so happy that I've made the changes that I have because I am truly living and I'm enjoying my life and I'm excited about my future and the possibilities of what life has in store. And this is not something that if you had told me even 2 years ago that I would feel this way, I wouldn't have believed you.
It's like I said, it's miraculous. And a testament to the choices that you've made along the way to process your emotions, to process your grief, to go through the hard things. Because I've watched you over the last 4 years go through kind of waves almost, where you would you'd go running forward, not just steps, you'd be running forward, and then you'd encounter another um, obstacle, something that you had to process. And that, I don't know if it was a setback. I don't know if you considered it a setback or just a new obstacle, but I would just kind of see your progress in processing that grief. It was, I mean, I hope it's okay to say it was fascinating to watch. It was hard. Like it would break my heart when I'd see you hit another wall almost. And there was a part of me, I think, that I would say, well, she's come so far. Like if this is, if this is where it stops, if this is where the progress stops, like she's doing pretty good. But then I'd see you eventually like burst through that wall and take off running again. It was like, whoa, she's she's amazing. So I don't know. I don't did you consider it setbacks or did you just consider it a new obstacle?
I would say most of the time it just felt like a new obstacle. There were a few times that it did feel like there were setbacks. And I've said before that you can knock me down for a while, but when I get back up, I am really pissed off. So I go forward fighting harder than I ever did before. That's just kind of how I live my life. So even with the setbacks, that's how I've dealt with those. I mean, sometimes it would take me a while. Sometimes a setback would, you know, I've had a couple of setbacks that took me a few months to get over. But for the most part, it's just been obstacles, and that might stop me for a day or two. And then I'm like, okay, I've rested a little bit. Time to get back up and get going.
That is one thing that I have learned from watching you, or maybe reinforced, maybe I already knew, but it's been reinforced to me, is the importance of fighting when it's time to fight and resting when it's time to rest. Because I watched you kind of follow um, your own intuition into what it was you needed to be doing at that particular moment. And so I would watch you just kind of like take a self inventory and say, I'm going to just keep fighting through this week or this month. And then other times you would just say, I got to rest. I got to process this. And you would take that time to just not just rest physically, but also rest emotionally and clear out space for your brain to process whatever it was you were going through. And I mean, I learned a lot from that, or at the very least, like reinforced how important that is to trust yourself, but also to be true to yourself when you know you need to keep fighting.
Right. And to choose your battles. Sometimes this is not the time to be fighting this particular battle.
That has to be particularly true in walking through the grief process, I would guess, because I would think it would be easy to get distracted by something that could be used as kind of a proxy for your grief or your pain. And you could go maybe beating on something else, right? Picking a fight somewhere rather than dealing with your own emotions. I don't know if you ever experienced that, but
Oh,
it seems that that happens a lot with anyone dealing with a pain or a struggle, that they'll fixate on something else to kind of avoid having to deal with whatever their actual emotion is that's, you know, frustrating them or hindering them or holding them back.
right. I would say that I experienced that in the beginning when after Lance died and I knew that I couldn't stay in that house anymore and I decided I was going to move. So I started packing up my house and that I was on my feet 14 hours a day, packing, organizing, moving, getting rid of things. And I guess in that way, when I was doing that, I was still being bombarded by things because I'm packing up my life with Lance. But it also gave me something else to focus on so that I wasn't completely in my grief 100%. So I guess I've done it. I can't think of anything else right now. That's the biggest one that comes up. I'm sure that I've done it a lot as I've gone through the last 4 years, but I know a lot of people do that. Staying busy is something that people say helps them. And everybody's different. For me, I need to process it. At some point, it's going to come up and it's not going to be a good thing if I haven't dealt with it. And I want to be able to deal with it and move forward because I don't want to be carrying all that baggage with me for the rest of my life.
You've been a very good example for me, since I've known you, of dealing with things in the here and now. It was one of the things that I noticed about you from the very beginning. You don't beat around the bush, and you don't stuff your emotions. You get it dealt with, whether it's uncomfortable or painful in that moment. It's like that it's going to be better to deal with it now than to let it fester. So I think you had a pretty good practice of that going into dealing with his death. So you already knew the value of dealing with things head on rather than letting them fester.
Well, that's how Lance and I were from the very beginning. We we always said what was on our minds, and we one of the things that we said early on, because we did make people uncomfortable, was you're thinking it, you might as well say it and get it out, deal with it and move on. And then that way we didn't carry all these grudges or hurts or whatever the other one may have caused, imagined or real, and we were able to move forward. And that's just how I like to live my life. It makes it so much easier. It makes it so much lighter. There are already so many things that make life heavy. Why do we add to it on purpose?
Interesting that something that is true in a marriage is also true in relationships, like friendships, family, things like that. Also true in dealing with grief, like these common truths that help you be able to navigate life in a way that is productive and in a way that puts the best version of you forward, um, to be of good use to the people around you. So that's pretty cool that you were able to cultivate that early on and that it helped you later on in something completely different, but still made that process easier to navigate.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I carried through all the way from, well, I've been like that, I think, my whole life. But it made it easier to be that way because Lance accepted me that way. A lot of people don't like that. I am very outspoken. I do say what's on my mind. And if there's a problem, I want to talk about it and I want to deal with it and I want to move forward. I don't want this to be something that I'm going to be carrying around wondering when it's going to come up. Let's deal with it and let's move on. Let's not play any games.
No drama in your world.
Well, I think there's always drama. I just try not to create it if I can help it.
You mentioned just people not talking about Lance anymore and it feeling like maybe he never existed. And how do you how do you combat that? Do you just keep talking about him or
Uh, that one's hard. Um, I talk about him when it's appropriate. He comes up in conversation because he was the biggest part of my life. So if I'm going to be able to talk to people, then he's probably going to come up in most conversations because we were together for 27 years. That was a huge chunk of my life. So if I am talking to people who I know are uncomfortable hearing that, then I just talk to them less because I can't I can't accommodate people's discomfort with death because we're all going to die.
I love that. If something's important to you, it's you're going to talk about it. And it's funny you say that because I gave up that fight a couple years ago. I love my family so deeply. I love my husband. I love my kids. And I talk about them a lot because I do love them. I love you and I loved Lance and I talk about you guys a lot. And so I remember, in the not too recent past, maybe in the last couple of years, being kind of self-aware in a way that says, oh, I wonder if I annoy people with how much I talk about this or that. And I think after I thought through it for a while, I thought, I don't care because I love them and that's me. And so then I think that was my answer to myself. I just won't talk to those people.
Right. You have to make that decision for yourself.
But I think not, I think changing how I speak about the things I love to accommodate someone else's comfort level, I don't think that's right. And so I think like you said, people are uncomfortable with death and they don't want to talk, they don't want to hear about something or they don't know how to approach it. So I just appreciate that you are willing to take that on and say, you know what, we're going to talk about this because this was a big part of my life. And if you want to be part of my life, you're going to hear about this guy that I loved. And
Right. And it's not all bad things either. It's not just talking about death, it's talking about the life that we had. And there was so much to that life. There were so many good things. There were a lot of really bad things and a lot of really hard things too. But that's how I relate to people is through the experiences that I've had. That's how we all relate to people. That just happened to be my experience. And if that makes someone uncomfortable, well, maybe we shouldn't be friends because that's my life. I'm being authentic if I am hiding something or avoiding talking about something because somebody else is uncomfortable about it. And I just won't do it.
I agree 100% with that. It's We talked about in a previous episode, like how if we try and manipulate our relationships in in the sense that we maybe filter or censor what we talk about to accommodate someone else's comfort level, we limit the opportunities for growth in ourselves and in other people. And, it's so that authenticity is so important. And we do have to be accountable for our words, we do have to be responsible for the things we say. But that is, we look at that, I think I look at that sometimes and just like making sure I'm not saying things that are offensive to someone else or make someone else uncomfortable. But it's also in the sense of I need to be true and honest in what I'm saying. It needs to be authentic. So it goes both ways, I think.
And in my case, moving forward into wherever life takes me, I am who I am because of the life that I lived. If I stop talking about that and I stop sharing the experiences that I had then who am I? I don't know who I am because that made me who I am. So I'm just going to keep doing it. And if people are uncomfortable with it, then it's not my problem.
Then maybe they aren't who is supposed to be in your life.
That's a good point. Well, I think that we've talked a lot about grief and we've talked a lot about my process of moving forward. And I think it's time to move on to other topics. Maybe we'll have one or two more episodes, but I don't want to be stuck in my grief and I don't want to get stuck in my grief. So I hope that this has been helpful for people. And thank you so much for being willing to have these conversations with me, Jenna, because I know that they're not easy. And I appreciate you being willing to do this.
Well, I feel honored to be able to walk alongside you and just that you trust me to have these conversations with you. So it's been good. It's helped me um, just to be able to uh, be that in other people's lives. So thank you for allowing me to be a part of it.
All right. Well, I will see you next time, Jenna.
All right, we'll see you. Bye.